Pittsburgh Penguins have been an absolute free fall this year. They currently sit 7th in the Metro Division, and for a team that was needing major improvements, they really haven't shown it. That could result into some major changes at the 2024 NHL Trade Deadline, and according to some, a move of one of their most important players. But what is next for this Pittsburgh Penguins team? What is their future going to look like, and how will they perform at the 2024 deadline? Will they be sellers? Will they be buyers? Well, make sure you watch till the end as we go through all the trade rumors and all the latest news to see what's next, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey trade rumor content just like this as we lead up to the trade deadline this year. The trade deadline this year is only 3 months away because time just isn't real anymore. Now, before we get into the big moves that Pittsburgh could end up making, let's first talk about today's sponsor in Underdog Fantasy. My favorite and soon to be your favorite place to play daily fantasy sports. If you want to make daily picks on all sports, not even just the NHL, Underdog Sports is the place to be. For today, I got Seth Jarvis higher than 0.5 points. He's been rolling lately. I think that's going to continue. Auston Matthews higher than 0.5 goals. He's been on a tear and he has a great record versus Buffalo as well. And then I got Elias Pettersson as a scorcher higher than 0.5 goals versus Dallas. The Canucks always kill the Stars, so I'm going to predict that happening again. And if you guys are new, Underdog Fantasy will get you an 100% match of your first deposit up to $100. Plus, Underdog will also give you a free pick'em to play with any player, and Underdog is operational in 30 plus US states, including Florida, California, Texas, and multiple Canadian provinces. So to make watching NHL hockey and sports even more fun, go into the description, click on the link, sign up to Underdog Fantasy by using promo code GRAP. And thank you so much to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring today's video. Now let's check up on the Pittsburgh Penguins, see how they're doing, and not very good. 7th in their division in points, as well as 7th in the division in points percentage. It doesn't really get too optimistic for Pittsburgh, and even though they are technically over NHL 500, they're still in a very weird place, still multiple points behind a team like New Jersey, who's been about as bad as they can be. And you look at it too, and you have teams like New Jersey, Carolina playing a little bit better, especially Carolina as of late, I think is going to really start improving. And there's really so few little avenues for the Pittsburgh Penguins to really improve. Maybe they're able to leapfrog a team like Washington, but with the way they're playing as well as Philadelphia, they might not even get there in the first place. This Pittsburgh team, which made so many moves in the offseason, and moves that I think did improve them by leaps and bounds, but it hasn't resulted in too much on-ice success. And now the clock is ticking again for a Pittsburgh team that missed the playoffs last year. Now, in years past, I would have said that Pittsburgh would still be buying no matter what 100%, but with Kyle Dubas now under the helm, I think he might be looking at a more long-term view of this Pittsburgh team. And I think if they're in the same position come February, they might make a big move that could result in some selling here. And when you look at it too, Pittsburgh's remaining schedule is actually pretty brutal. They face the Rangers 2 times, the Bruins 3 times, Vegas once, Vancouver twice, teams like LA and Dallas once as well. And when you look at the easier opponents, they're not really in the greatest position either. They face Columbus 3 times, but they've been looking a little bit better lately. They only face San Jose, Chicago once each. And I think for Pittsburgh, they're in a really weird spot. And again, this is according to Tankathon. They have one of the hardest schedules, the 3rd hardest schedule remaining in the entire league. But then we go to a bombshell of an article here by The Athletic from Josh Yohe talking about the Pittsburgh Penguins' future, and specifically with Sidney Crosby and Jake Guentzel, gives us a great idea of what could be next. And for one of these especially, it's not looking too good. The first question says, do you think Sidney Crosby is going to ask out if the Penguins miss the playoffs again? And as Josh says, it's a relevant one to ask. He says, I'm not inside Sid's mind, so I don't really know what he's thinking. I've covered him for a long time, and honestly, I'd be very surprised if he ever were to play anywhere else, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen. If the Penguins go into a tailspin for the remainder of the season and next, well, Sid has a decision to make because his contract will be up at the time. He says, would it appeal to him to head elsewhere and play with his buddies in Colorado for a few years to end his career? Maybe. I doubt it though. He loves Pittsburgh and the organization very much, and he's very comfortable here as he's a creature of habit. But then we go into the big one here. If the Pens look into extending Jake Guentzel, are they worried a 7 or 8 year term might encroach on their next contending window? And this question talks about contract extensions and everything and what the next contract could look like, but Josh Yohe steers it in more of a trade discussion here. As he starts saying right out of the gate, this is a really tricky one. As far as I can tell, Kyle Dubas and Guentzel's agent, Ben Hankinson, have not engaged in any significant trade talks. Guentzel is indeed scheduled to become an unrestricted free agent on July 1st. He goes on to say, if you're the Penguins, you have so many things to consider. Will Guentzel age well? Is it a lock that Guentzel signs in Pittsburgh if he's unsigned by next summer? Maybe, maybe not. What kind of haul could the Penguins get in a trade? If the Penguins are 10 points out of a playoff spot when the trade deadline arrives, Dubas pretty much has to trade him. I think you can land a first round pick and a very good prospect in return for Guentzel, who was one of the great playoff performers of his time. And then goes on to say, how would Crosby react to the team trading Guentzel? Would it impact his desire to stay in Pittsburgh? And then this last paragraph is especially brutal. It's a very tough situation. I'm guessing the Penguins would be willing to talk about an extension in the range of 3 to 4 years. But why would Jake want that? He knows he can get a longer deal on the open market. If the Penguins are out of a playoff spot come February, I have to think there's a real chance that he's traded. The haul would be huge. It would jumpstart the Penguins' extremely stale farm system and would open up $6 million in cap space to spend this summer. And that is absolutely huge because up until now, we hadn't really had many whispers about Jake Guentzel. In fact, the only real player we've heard whispers about was maybe Erik Karlsson potentially being traded again. But Jake Guentzel is a big one. And especially with how much of a mainstay he's been on that forward group for such a long time, and still how good he is too, he would probably become the best option on the trade market. Now, like Josh he talks about with the Jake Guentzel contract situation, he makes $6 million for this year and will be a UFA afterwards, but there's a serious conversation to be had over whether he stays with Pittsburgh. He has a modified no trade clause, a 12-team no trade list, but considering the talent level, I don't think that's going to narrow it down too much. There's still going to be a bunch of teams looking for his services. The problem here, though, that Pittsburgh needs to face is that it's not just talking about one player here in a deal. Especially with Jake Guentzel, this is a trade that would really affect the team. You, of course, have that connection with Crosby, which has been such a mainstay for such a long time. And you're not just factoring in Guentzel and the team, you're factoring in Sidney Crosby's relationship with the franchise as well. How does he feel about a Guentzel trade? How would he feel in a situation like that? And with his contract as well being up in 2 seasons, does Sidney Crosby still want to stay on a Guentzel-less Pittsburgh Penguins? That could be the real question here. Sure, it might seem impossible for Crosby to leave Pittsburgh now with Jake Guentzel and them still trying to contend, but if Kyle Dubas pulls the trigger, if he gets rid of Jake Guentzel for a first and a prospect, does he still want to stay on the team? Does he still want to be a part of this franchise? There are so many factors here for this Pittsburgh team that it's just such a hard situation to navigate. Now let's talk about Jake Guentzel, though, as the player and what he could actually get in return for a trade. You can see at 29 years old, he'll be turning 30 next October. So by the start of next season, he will be in his 30s. But you can see just over the past few years how consistent that scoring has been. This year in 30 games, 14 goals, 20 assists for 34 points. You can see just consistently solid goal scoring, solid point numbers. In his last playoffs in 2022, got 8 goals, 10 points in 7 games. This is still an extremely valuable player, and especially if we're talking about playoff performance too, he's shown in the past to have some major results. Though 2019 for 2021 wasn't the greatest, I think he still can rebound in a big way with a true contender here, and he would immediately be a first-line addition for really any NHL team. Now, we also have this really interesting article from Bleacher Report and Adam Gretz saying 4 realistic landing spots for Penguins winger Jake Guentzel. Let's see how these work out. Now, the first one he mentions is the Colorado Avalanche, and this one will be fascinating. This is a Colorado team that really just has not been the same since Gabriel Landeskog retired, and they have that massive hole on left wing, and even though Nichushkin has played pretty well as of late, I don't think he's their ideal first-line left wing. You put in Jake Guentzel, though, with McKinnon and Rantanen, and that becomes, with Gabriel Landeskog's absence, the best line since that line was put together. And then you'd have to be able to have Nichushkin on the second line, Wood on the third line, and would really create so much more depth for this Colorado lineup. That is a really interesting one, and especially if Colorado's going to go for another rental, I think Guentzel can make a lot of sense. The problem becomes, though, in a Jake Guentzel trade, what Pittsburgh would actually want, and again, I think in terms of pure value, it would probably be easier for Pittsburgh to just want a first and a top prospect, but I think in Pittsburgh's situation, they will still want to add something to the roster because next year, they're going to want to be contending again. They're going to want to reset here, and even though they would add some cap space, I think they would want to add youthful talent now. The problem is for Colorado, they don't really have a lot of youthful, impactful forwards that I think Pittsburgh would really want. Same thing as well on the defense, unless they're going to trade Bo Byron, but I don't expect that to happen. So I think Colorado is an interesting fit there, where we're probably have to be pick and prospect oriented, but I'm not sure if Pittsburgh will want that in the end. The second team that Adam mentions is the Boston Bruins. This one would also be fascinating, mostly because for Boston, he would probably be on that second line. I'm not really sure if they would split up Marchand and Pastrnak. It's just working too well, those two together. So Guentzel might actually be on the second line in Boston, but it would make their forward group even more lethal. We've seen a lot of guys overperform to their perfect levels. Players like James Van Riemsdyk have been incredible this year. Charlie Coyle has been fantastic, but maybe you're able to put him on the third line with Coyle or something. Bruins would have a lot more options there, though, and we've seen them go for a lot of rentals last year. Maybe they go for more again this year. And hey, we talked about potentially youthful players being a part of a Guentzel trade back to Pittsburgh. Maybe Jake DeBrincat. This is finally the opportunity where he gets dealt. I'm not really sure if it would be in a situation like this, but maybe Jake DeBrincat could have a new situation in Pittsburgh, a new fresh coat of paint in a new team, and that could end up working out for him. And that could be the DeBrincat trade that we've been talking about for years and years and years now. But I think Pittsburgh would be a really interesting fit with Boston. They haven't traded a lot between each other lately, but I think a DeBrincat Guentzel deal, you could find an interesting fit. Number 3 is the Vegas Golden Knights. I mean, why not? Vegas is already just a wacky team. Adding Guentzel would just be unfair, man. I mean, just imagining a Guentzel player on the left wing of Jack Eichel and Mark Stone, and that's immediately one of the best first line in hockey. You could have Barbashev on the second line, a player like Dorofia maybe on the third, and Carey on the fourth. Maybe you have Cotter switching out. I don't know. It would be video game-like for Vegas, but hey, I mean, they got all their first-round picks. They got a ton of picks still to burn. Maybe they go after him. And actually, maybe a player like Pavel Dorofiev is the younger player going back to Pittsburgh. I think they would want still more of an established presence, but who knows? And then last but not least is my favorite team, the Dallas Stars. No, please, don't trade for a forward. This defense has shown enough that it is bad as it is. If we go after Guentzel, I mean, sure, it'd be fun. I mean, it would be wild, but I'm not sure if that's what the team needs. Especially when you look at things, and I don't think the left wing really needs any additions, and I don't think the forward group really needs any additions at all. I think it is good enough to compete, good enough to win a Stanley Cup, but again, you look at that defense, and you're probably going to have to give up one of these guys to be able to make the cap work, and I just don't think it's going to work out. You're already going to have to give a D, and I don't think for Dallas they need to be any thinner on defense. Please, just trade for a defenseman. Don't make this hard, Jim Nill. For me, a team that still makes a lot of sense as a buyer this year is the Nashville Predators. Sure, you'd have Forsberg and Guentzel as your top 2 left wing, but that's not a problem. You can space that out pretty well, especially on the power play. And I think it could be a really interesting fit with how Nashville is building. I think they're pretty confident in their prospect pool as well. And Nashville also has a ton of youthful talent on the roster that has established themselves as players. Maybe a player like Cody Glass goes back to Pittsburgh or something, Philip Tomasino perhaps. They got a lot of options that I think Pittsburgh would really like. And I think for Nashville as well, they're one of the few teams out there that I think could trade for Guentzel as well as extend him in the trade too. But I just gotta say, I am not jealous of Kyle Dubas' position right now. This is a weird team to look at with Pittsburgh and their future. And even though I still think it's more likely that they buy this deadline or try to go for something in the offseason, if they are able to re-sign Jake Guentzel, I'm not sure if Kyle Dubas is going to just let him ride off into the sunset in free agency. Sure, this is a year you do not want to waste if you're Pittsburgh with the aging core that they have there, but at the same time, you don't want to lose Guentzel for nothing either. So this is going to be a wild next couple of months for Pittsburgh as we see what decisions they end up making. But if they still stay stagnant, there could end up being some huge moves in the end. Let us know what you guys think about this whole situation with Jake Guentzel, though. Do you think he actually gets traded, or do you think Pittsburgh will still be a buyer at this deadline with their position? Let us know down below, and if you guys think they'll still make the playoffs this year. Of course, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you haven't for more trade rumor content just like this. And, of course, share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online, all the Penguins fans as well, to get the dire hopes out there to them. And, of course, click on this card for all my trade rumor content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan, and I will see you in the next one. Have a great day. And goodbye.